Who was Mary Magdalene? Was she a redeemed prostitute? Was she Jesus' favorite disciple? Was she the wife of Jesus and bore their child? Was she a high priestess from a different religious tradition, embracing fertility rituals? We will never know the actual historical facts for certain. But we do know for certain that today Mary Magdalene is a controversial archetypal symbol that captures our imagination. Hello, my name is Vasumitra, and I'm a teacher of the sacred sexual arts. In the next few minutes, we will explore unveiling Mary Magdalene and other archetypal symbols surrounding the ancient and modern role of the sacred prostitute. When we began filming the documentary, we discovered a number of people saying, "Oh, a film about Mary Magdalene." So we began to incorporate her more into the documentary. But the story of Mary Magdalene really begins over 5,000 years ago in the nearby culture of Sumer. We read from cuneiform tablets of the sexual desire of the goddess Inanna, who also came to be known as Ishtar and Astarte in other cultures. The followers of goddess Inanna performed a fertility ritual known as Eros Gamos, or the sacred marriage. Here, humans representing deities would unite in sexual union to invoke the heavens and the earth to provide bountiful crops. The men and women who performed these ceremonies were what we would call the sacred prostitute. Sexuality was the sacrament. One of the Mary Magdalene legends today is that she was a high priestess in the Inanna Ishtar Astarte traditions, where sexuality was often celebrated openly. This painting of Mary Magdalene by Richard Stoddard is based on a Magdalene image in the Cathedral of Mary Magdalene in Jerusalem. In her hand, she reveals an egg. Such an image can easily be interpreted as fertility symbol. Also, our word Easter derives from the goddess Astarte's name. Astarte was the goddess of spring, a time when eggs were a part of celebrations honoring her. Was Mary Magdalene an Astarte high priestess, joined with Jesus to reveal certain esoteric teachings? We will never know for certain, but the legend lives. Mary Magdalene has become the symbol for the sacred prostitute in the West. Sex and orgasm are a path to oneness with God, Source, Goddess, to oneness with all that is. As long as we consciously or unconsciously believe that sex and spirit are opposites, that spirit is good and sex is inherently sinful, we will never understand the legend of Mary Magdalene. She represents for many the primordial archetypal knowing that there is no separation between one's self, another, and divinity. When we remove the veil concealing Mary Magdalene and the mystical teachings of sexuality and her orgasmic nature, we see we all are beings of one light. In the remainder of this DVD, you will find a number of excerpts of interviews not included in the accompanying 90-minute documentary, The Sacred Prostitute. We regretted that so many insightful stories from the interviews would not fit into the time frame. So we have selected from the outtakes several in-depth explanations on Mary Magdalene, Tantra, and other sacred sexuality traditions. We recommend you first watch the documentary, which gives a context for these outtakes. The painting of Mary Magdalene reveals the egg. If we wish to know its meaning, though, we must experience it. in our own hands.
The traditional Christian point of view, from what I've ascertained, is that Magdalene was a prostitute, and in the most demeaning sense of the word, and that she became a follower of Jesus the Christ, and it was through his teachings that she was saved and forgiven, and that she became what is often called the repentant whore or the repentant prostitute. And in a pilgrimage to the Magdalene that I took in '96 in France, sometimes there would be poses of her and as this repentant. And that, again, when you tune into one's own sense, I didn't feel resonance within that, within myself. And that often she was presented in Christian teachings with as an example of overcoming sin. Whereas if we look at the Christian mysteries from an esoteric point of view, she was a high priestess of the sacredness of sexuality, and that it was a very high sacrament, and that she was herself a high priestess and of royal lineage. And so the breakdown of that, and my sense of what happened was that in order for the political nature of religion and of the church as an institution to gain control, that they could take control of the sacraments that were often taken care of by the women, the healers, the shamans and so forth in the villages and countryside. Those could be taken and institutionalized in churches and wedding ceremonies and so forth. But the sacrament of sacred union between a man and a woman couldn't be taken as easily. So with the church demeaning women, demeaning sexuality, and lifting up Christ as a celibate being, and saying that his priest needed to be celibate, created such a schism in the human psyche that we're still recovering from that in these times. In '96, I said to one of the priestesses, I think our next step is to heal the Madonna whore split. And I don't even know where those words came from. But when I said our next step is to heal the Madonna whore split, she started trembling and crying and asked me what that meant. And I said, well, my sense of spirituality is that when we talk of the Madonna or the Virgin Mother or the feminine, the way it's been presented to us through particularly Catholicism, is it's upper chakra, and it's pure and untouched, has nothing to do with our wholeness. And so there's this split between the upper chakras and the lower chakras, our sexuality and our spirituality, and it inhibits the flow of life force energy. And to me, our natural state is what people say when they say, oh, I'm really turned on. I think that when we're not turned on, that means we're shut down. And it doesn't have anything to do with acting sexually or not, but it's being fully alive. And I always talk about being on a path of enlivenment rather than enlightenment. And that at that time I didn't associate Magdalene with the whore, with the lower chakra, but just the Madonna consciousness was upper chakra, and that there was a gap, a gaping hole in our womanness, in our priestessing, that had to be filled. My connection with the Magdalene has been through direct experience of tuning into what I now understand as an archetypal pattern of consciousness that relates to the sacred feminine. And for me, I understand archetypes as universal primary patterns that of energy, of consciousness that are embedded in the human psyche. And though I'm not a Jungian, some of my exposure to the Magdalene has been through Jungian writings. And Jung talks about when there's an archetype that's lost to the human consciousness, when it's really buried deeply in the subconscious, that there's a void. And the archetypes of the sacred feminine have been so buried, whether it's because the goddess needed a rest or because patriarchy was an invasive force, or whatever we use to rationalize how that may have happened. The fact is that it did, and that in the last couple of decades it's been rising, and the archetype of the goddess and of the Magdalene, who I understand as an Isis high priestess or a royal priestess who was married to Jesus the Christ. And that their academicians could debate whether or not they're married and what is the true history of the historic Magdalene or the historic Christ. And that is really pretty endemic to me. I find the historic information and the revisions, the rewrites in books such as Bloodline of the Holy Grail or Woman of the Alabaster Jar or I Remember Union, they seem to be at odds with one another, and people could get into endless debates between that and what different religions teach or don't teach about that. But for me, I always look for where I have resonance. So in the work that I've done with what is called a Magdalene sisterhood, in which we identify as being keepers of the wisdom of the sexual mysteries, that all of these different tellings or historical renderings, or even the ones that we don't agree with or individually, are simply aspects of this archetype. And so rather than in a linear left brain way debate who's got the true story of Magdalene, of the historic Magdalene, the way we've worked is to embrace all of them. In 1996, I went on a tour to France that was focused on visiting the sacred sites of Mary Magdalene. And the stories that they were weaving into the tour indicated that there's a small village in southern France on the Mediterranean where the three Marys, Mary Magdalene, Mother Mary, and Mary Martha, came to shore in a small boat that had tossed at sea for some time after the crucifixion of Christ. And they were in danger, and Mary was with child, Mary Magdalene, and that this child was the child of her beloved Jesus the Christ, her husband. And that I was really intrigued that there was a story in a village that actually was living this particular mythology, and was quite interested in going there. And as I continued my journeys and get in conversations with French people about this, I discovered there's what could be called the cult of the Magdalene, in which she's highly revered as an apostle, as a teacher of the Christian mysteries, and had followers of her own, and that it was common knowledge that she was the wife of Jesus the Christ. And which was, I had never heard people other than in my particular circles of friends. And I was talking to people on the streets. And even someone even gave me a postcard of the bride and groom together, which is truly extraordinary, and such a shift in consciousness from what my imprint had been growing up in this country.
And then there's Mary Magdalena, who we've heard about in Bible school, or we've heard about in Western culture, but she was rather vilified because she was considered a prostitute in a very derogatory sense. Well, more and more information is coming out that she was actually a very essential counterpart to Christ, that Christ was the acknowledged human because of the mores of patriarchy, but that his work would have been impossible without the support of Mary Magdalena, who was a trained priestess. From a very little girl like me, she was a rebel and was acknowledged as probably not going to be able to fit in to her culture. So her mother decided, I guess what we have to do then is bring my daughter to training, to priestess training. And so she was a trained priestess. And with Christ, we're finding this information that's coming out, she was the platform for his work. And so, we do have such a reverence for Christ, and yet behind the throne is this woman that's not being acknowledged, has never been acknowledged. The only woman on the other side that is acknowledged is the white virginal Immaculate Conception. But the woman who helped Christ understand the full complexities of his teachings is not acknowledged. Virgin Mary is the only, let's call her a goddess, the only representation of the divine that exists in Western culture. And so the juicy goddesses of, for instance, an African-based religion, we don't have them in our culture. And so in kind, women don't have the knowledge that they can experience that juice, and the aspiration is to be immaculate as opposed to feel the womb energy. And that's a huge thing in this culture, because everybody wants to feel those rivers flowing and those streams bursting forth out of the ocean, out of the ground, and the currents of the ocean in their own body, because it is our inheritance to have all that dynamic, beautiful life force accessible to our senses. And we're so cut off from it, in part because we only have this virginal image of the perfect female. And so because we want that and we're cut off from it, here I am providing that experience so that people can come to it in themselves.
My name is Harley Swift-Ear Reagan. My Native American or Turtle Island name is Unihawi Askenatan Anakawi. And I'm speaking officially as a representative of the Turtle Island, which is North, South, Central America, Métis association called the Twisted Hair Métis Medicine Society's Council of Elders. And I sit on that council in the South. And I'll be talking to you today about the historical and the movement of sacred sexuality as a way to reach spirit, to ascend into a higher spiritual level of communication with the Creator and the Creatress on Turtle Island. And in talking to the elders, and particularly to Stella Many Names, who is the grandmother that's considered to be the official recorder for the Twisted Hair Society. She's also a member of the Black Widow Society. And Also speaking from Sophia Thinsticks, who is also the major Phoenix firewoman that speaks for the spiritual sexual traditions of the Twisted Hairs. The hair symbolized knowledge to the Turtle Island people, to Native American people. And to twist the hair meant to go from one place to another and find out what were the better ways it worked, what were the ways to increase the alchemy of ceremony. And that included emotional, mental, physical, spiritual, and of course, sexual. And so we saw that there were 5 aspects of the human being, and Turtle Island people very clearly understood the connection of the 5 aspects of a human to nature. We understood that our emotions was water, our mind was wind, our body was the earth, our spirit was the sun or the fire, but our sexuality was the soul, it was our immortality, and that we had a most amazing gift given by Spirit, and that was the ability through orgasm, through orgastic expression, to ascend back to the place where we were one with creation. And that we were unique in that sense, that while other animals mated for procreative purposes only, we didn't have to use the sexual union as an act of procreation. We could actually use it for what it was designed, which was to enhance and build a long, ongoing, sustaining duration of sexual intimacy. And then through a spiritual, very sensual connection, actually ascend into a greater connecting, what I would call connecting link of intent to creation itself, to the everything. Call that the Great Spirit, call it God, whatever you wish, but to us it was a connection to the everything, to the universe. I think it's very important to realize that there are different types of shamanism, sorcery, work that is done inside the field of sacred sexuality. That any instructor, a person, a man, a woman of knowledge, of power, of spiritual connection and intent, was called a wehas, which literally meant a giver of knowledge. The other term that was frequently used was a nagual, which meant a man or a woman of power and knowledge. When it came to specifically sacred sexuality or spiritual sexuality, ceremonial sexuality, the proper term was an ada wehas, which literally meant like a phoenix fire person, a person who taught you how to bring the energy from the first chakra up the body, through the whole body, which we see as the 8th chakra, into the luminous egg cocoon, which we saw as the 9th chakra, and up into the halo, which was the 10th chakra, to produce ascension into the double, into the other physical self, and the out-of-body experience, if you will. And that was an Ada Wehas. So it was like the phoenix rising and going into ascension. So the term phoenix fire person, or Ada Wehas in the old language. Our body has 7 chakras that allow us to dream and be present, an 8th body, which is the 8th chakra. As I said, the 9th chakra was the luminosity. And that inside that luminosity, there were 4 kinds of basic energies. There was electrical, or electromagnetic, psychic, and kinetic. That the electromagnetic is the charge of the human luminous being, or cocoon. That the psychic kinetic was the discharge. And that nowhere did that come together so completely inside the law of cohesion as at the moment of orgasmic expression. That indeed in the human luminous egg cocoon there are 2 bands of light, 2 tubes of light that are called your sovine, or your connection back to, shall we say, the womb of Wakan, the womb of the great grandmother of the universe. Just as there was an umbilical cord to your physical mother. And that is an immortal umbilical cord, the sovine. And that through that sovine, when we come into sexual union, at the end of which there are a series of filaments that interconnect. And when they come together in an electromagnetic charge. And there's this huge buildup of energy. When we get ready to separate, there's a psychic kinetic discharge. And that can be going on for quite some time. Even as we sit here speaking, subconsciously, maybe even deeply unconsciously, my fibers reach out to those that I'm communicating with, and yours reach towards me. with training, one can learn to control those fiber connections. And that's really the height, the doctorate, graduate school level of understanding spiritual sexuality as sacred sexuality within ceremonial sexuality, was what happens with the fibers. And so we talk about fiber ties, what you can do with each one, how to breathe with the fire breath, because you've got a great light, a fire right in the middle of your navel, right where the soul vine comes from. And it's more than just the joining of the tapili and tapuli, which is like the penis and the vagina of the male and female. It's far beyond that. You can move those fibers up and into your hands, for example, and make a connection that is awesome because, excuse me, you're controlling the electromagnetic charge and the subsequent psychic kinetic discharge that produces the orgasmic response. This was taught to a child. I learned it when I was 6. I did not learn it in a direct sexual context at first. I learned it in nature. But as you well know, when I'm teaching anything in the Twisted Hair tradition, we have an absolute law that we must state, and that is, don't believe anything I tell you. Approach it as truth, approach it as falsehood, and find out if it works. Knowledge is a sacred thing, and nowhere is that knowledge more sacred than when you start dealing with one's sexuality, because it's your soul, it's your catalyst energy. It's like the baking soda in the cake of life. And you don't need to believe in it, you need to know it. And someone asked me once, what is truth? And I said, truth is any knowledge that works and increases your measure. And your measure is your self-acceptance, your self-discernment, your self-worth, and your self-love. And so I've shared some of my truth. If it's going to become yours, you've got to take the first step. Learn what it means to put the two words together into an action of being spiritually sexual as a sacred act of consciously assembling your world. And that means you've got to take it a step at a time.
When we use the term sacred prostitute, because of our culture and the sexual repression and the negative response that it has, so many of us really do not understand that the prostitute has been a part of our culture since always and for always. And call it sacred prostitute or sacred geisha by many different traditions from every era since humans first were on this planet. There has been a place where men and women could go, where they can receive tender, loving care, where they can receive sacred, sensual, sexual healing. And as Christian Judaic teachings have come in, as we have been dealing more and more with sexual repression and turning sexuality into something that is negative. It is God created. Why would the Great Spirit create our bodies in the beautiful expressions in the form of our bodies if it wasn't meant for us to honor and respect the sexuality? So the spiritual sexuality therapy, first of all, is underneath everything is what your sexual relationship is to the world. It is what your artistic originality is. It is your sexual relationship to mineral, plant, animal, human. And so many of us do not understand the importance of our sexuality. It sits in the center of life. And so for us to understand this sacred sexuality, and that sexuality sits in the center of the wheel. Imagine spokes that come out: emotional, mental, physical, spiritual. You can go to the gym and work out physically and it won't touch the others. You can go and learn spirituality, but it won't touch the others. But you start dealing with who you are as a sexual human being and it will turn your world upside down. Because you now are going to be dealing with who you are emotionally, how you feel about yourself mentally, physically, and spiritually. So dealing with sexuality as the key to everything, the bottom line, is something that most people do not have an understanding of, because they don't realize our sexuality is our sacred life force energy. That is the catalyst. It's the gasoline in this engine. Because you see, if we're sexually free, it does not make us promiscuous. If we're sexually free, it actually does not give us license, but it makes us responsible. It makes us conscious, and it allows us to connect to spirit. And we don't need any in-between. We do not need to go to anybody, to any religious order. When we can connect to ourselves sexually, it is an automatic, direct connection to spirit and to the Great Spirit, or to God, or Jesus, or Buddha, by any name that your higher source is connected to. And so I realize that when a people are sexually free, they are free. And there is no tyrant that can rule them, and that they can live a free life. So you see, sexuality and spiritual sexuality is more than just the engagement of two individuals to birth children, but it's the engagement of free, autonomous individuals who will live a life of freedom and who can change this world, and possibly we can have a world of peace. Not just peace, but a world of freedom.
So I studied. I went back and looked at all the old texts that I could, the books. Nancy Quell's Corbett book on the sacred prostitute was one of the first that I read, and it's heavy. She's a psychoanalyst, but her term for sacred prostitute was the bringer of erotic joy. Who can be against the bringers of erotic joy? In fact, bring on more. This is not just having sex. This is erotic joy. Joy is not momentary. Joy is a state. It's like, wow, I'm carrying it around. I'd like to just give a moment of how after reading all this, how I perceived at its best what this looked like 1,000 and 1,500 years, 1,000 to 2,000, 2,500 years ago, especially in the Mediterranean. Each town, especially the big towns, had various guardians, gods or goddesses, mostly goddesses. And there were temples in various towns to the local goddess. And many towns had the same goddesses. And they're goddesses that we know today. But in those temples lived women and men whose task it was to embody the goddess or the god. That meant that they had God's life, goddess life in their body. And in fact, all of their preparation was passed on, all of their training, sometimes from the time they were a child, parents recognized this kid is erotically gifted, and they would bring the child to the temple and leave the boy or girl at the temple. And the child was raised in that tradition of meditation, actually my word is embodiment, of being in a body radically and bringing in all that is into the body and being an expression of the highest values of that city, of that God, so that when people came to the temple, and I don't think sex was the major thing here, someone could look at this woman or this man or this boy and say, that is what is humanly possible. Wow. They have brought so much, they're so glowing, so full of it. And in fact, if somebody's like that, you want to touch them. You want to hold them. So I think, I don't want to just have sex. I want to sleep all night with you, or I want you to wash me, or I want you to feed me, or just lay hands on me. So in these traditions, these women and men did all of they were like monasteries, but they were sex monasteries, and they were embodying the highest of values. That's some of the skills that I think were important here were breath, because they're talking about a state of being. So how can they communicate a state of being? But by breathing. Breathing is bringing in more life. So one of the things these folks did was to breathe with their clients, always. They're not their clients, the supplicants, the people who came to visit. By the way, in some of the tradition, if men went on a journey, especially to war, before they would come back into the city, they have war in their body, they would come to the temple and be washed, or to breathe the war out of them. Even going on a long journey, they have been out in the world. They come back into this town, into this realm of this goddess. They would come to the temple. And that was the role of these sacred intimates, people who are intimate for their transformation, to welcome them back in. Okay, now naturally, who we are as human beings, what gets most emphasized was sometimes there was total sexual union. I think sometimes I can just see a sacred prostitute masturbating and the glow coming out in the whole city. It was like, wow, it's certain times of the year, high holy days, or getting flogged, and she emanated her. But it's waking up the energy. So this is now in other parts of the town were the prostitutes. And they may have been friends, hung out together. But the prostitute role was maybe, by the way, my own belief is many prostitutes today, and in those days, at times embodied the highest, so that it overlapped. And many times, when you went to the temple, here's the phrase that we use in my tradition, is the God in today? Is the goddess in? And I see around this temple little rooms. And so you're coming to the temple and you look in, from my tradition, like a bathhouse, and you're going from room to room and looking in, and so, is the goddess in today? Try Cynthia next door. The goddess is really in with her today, but this is not a good day for me. Because every day the goddess isn't in. Sometimes it's like that. But I would say, if I had to talk in language today, the reason people went is to change states. The prostitutes were experts at changing your state. When erotic joy is brought around, or you're flogged, or you're washed, or you're fed certain foods, your state changes. So this is about ecstatic states, mystical states, the highest states possible, not a getting off. That's what happened in the other part of town where the prostitutes are. So the difference is when men and women went to the temple, they came away, maybe it was enough once a year to go there. Wow, I've got it. But, as you know, when you go to the other part of town, the next night you want to go back. It doesn't last a year. It's sometimes, as I say, it does. So the reason I got into this profession in this lifetime is in San Francisco in the 80s, I found a great deal of men who were doing sex work that was just an umbrella for erotic shamanism. That's what I first thought. They were doing amazing things, all different types of things. And I remember having all these sessions as a masseur. So I was a masseur from the 70s, where Ray and I met. But I found massage and erotic massage was just an umbrella for people's gifts coming out. And whoever, nobody I knew did just Swedish massage or Esalen massage. It was this amazing diversity of gifts. And I thought, what to call this? And I knew that they were sacred prostitutes. And I like the term sacred prostitute. But I wanted to set up a school. I wanted a school to train people because there are skills that you may not know. You may have the gift, but to really help people access these states, there's traditional skills and new skills. So I wanted to set this up. So I came up with the term sacred intimate. I invented that term. My basic spiritual stance comes from the Native American spirituality and the Lakota Sioux. The phrase, all my relations. This phrase was a prayer that was a remembering for the Native American that I am connected to everything, all my relations. I'm connected to the earth, I'm connected to the sky, to all plants, animals, I'm connected to the past, to the future, I am connected. Well, if you are connected, and when erotic energy rises in your body, the whole universe, in a sense, feels that erotic energy. So a phrase, and I use this in some of my videos and in my work, but I think a sacred prostitute phrase is, as I receive pleasure, so the whole universe receives pleasure through me. As I breathe, the whole universe breathes through me. Body Electric School has a lesbian coffee house across the street called Mama Bear's in Oakland. And I went across the street and I had a T-shirt on saying, as I receive pleasure, so the whole universe receives pleasure through me. And this big lesbian with a hangover was giving me coffee. And she said, I have a headache. Does the whole universe have a headache through me? Yes.
Shetimer is literally, I guess, we translate that to knowing love through duality. And Shetimer is the resurrection of the I would say orgasmic energy aspects. Because really to call it sexual alchemy, that's a term that I use to just kind of be clear or more general with people, but really, in truth, it's more orgasmic alchemy, to work with the actual creation energy in all of us and to use that to create other effects in our lives. Be that other effect be just plain joy, clearing your skin, having better relationships with people, having a better relationship with your sense of divine, and making that real in your life. Whatever it is that you want to create, just making your food taste better, whatever. It's a tool. It's an alchemy to use to bring about change in your real world. Shetimer, I cannot say, and I would seriously doubt, except maybe in the dying days of Kemet, that it would have been taught as I teach it now. The only reason I teach it now as a separate practice is because we are so segmented from ourselves. We're so segmented from our natural energy in this society, in modern society now. The idea that sexuality is anywhere different from spirituality, that sexuality is in any way separate or different from, that to tap in the sexual energy is in any way different from tapping into what is referred to as prayer. In my tradition, we cannot pray without awakening the orgasmic core, or you're not there. If you're not present, you're not praying. And to be fully present is to be fully in tune with one's divine ability to create. That is the essence of the infinite that's still alive in all of us. That's what we recognize as the orgasmic core, the orgasmic center. And that is what the practice of Shetimer seeks to bring out to fullness and conscious awareness, and a conscious awareness of that orgasmic center and how we can how we already are tapped into it every day. So it's there when I'm eating. It's there when I'm making love in the classical sense. It's there when I'm making love in the not so classical sense, such as smelling a flower or preparing a meal, or just having a conversation like we're doing now. In our view, all of this is making love because all of this is an act of creation. All of this is furthering the process of creation in this world. And as divine beings, this is what we are here to do. We are here to procreate mirrors of divinity in life, not just as little babies, but as experiences that we have. So every conscious experience is going to, if we don't have an awareness of that orgasmic core, we're not present. We can't pray without having that awareness, without having a conscious awareness of that. So in those times, the phrase sheti is the plural of shetet. Mer, in English you would say mer is love, but mer is more refers to the vibration and the frequency of light that embraces all things. In English, the closest thing in English to that would be love. Shetet is the feminine sexual organ, the organ of pleasure. It's the combination of the vulva and the birth canal. And it's also, in the ancient language, the word for knowledge. So knowledge is that center, that divine feminine center. That's the house of knowledge. That is the essence of knowledge. So knowing love through embracing duality, sheti mer. One of the cornerstones of African spiritual culture, not just mine, but across the board, is possession. That is the law. You won't find traditional African spiritualists running around thumping anybody's book. The book is here. It's me. It's what happens when I am in trance. It's the transmission. It's direct communion with divine. So as a part of my training, a very big part, was going into trance and maintaining states of trance, maintaining them for sometimes incredibly long periods of time. And what began to be very clear is that a certain energy, whom we know as Heteru, had my number in a very big way. And that is what gives me the dispensation to hold the lineage of Sheti Mer. That is what gives me the dispensation to be out front with the practice, with orgasmic alchemy practice, and to bring people to that and bring people to an awareness of that. It's not an earthly teacher that does this. It is Heteru. And it is her consistent possession. When I say possession, it's not a single event. It's like, oh yeah, on February 6, 1995, this happened. It means that she lives with me. I've given myself. To be a priestess means to give myself over in possession to the Interu, to the divine ones, that I have given my will to them. There's a prayer that I say daily. It is, my life to your will. It translates that. And it's an ongoing possession. That ongoing possession is what gives me the dispensation, as you say. It's so incredibly and entirely fundamental to life. Without it, and we recognize it in the animal kingdom, how is it that, us big brain monkeys don't get it? That it's the fundamental thing, our ability to create, our ability to do so at will. We are not bound by natural cycles of the moon or cycles of being in heat or not in heat. We can call up the energy of attraction at will. This is a very potent thing. This is a very important thing. And it's always been there. So, yeah, it would have to be in the creation story. Of any people's creation story. How would you explain, let's just, even if I would to suppose creation stories don't come from a divine source. They're just about explaining things, which I don't believe. No explanation would be complete if it didn't include orgasmic awareness. If it was just something that happened, like earthquakes, and you didn't know why, that would be a different thing. But no, we can call this up. It's not like the earthquake. It's not something, that shake, rattle, and roll comes on command. And it stops on command. And we spend our lives playing with it. So to me, it's a fundamental abuse, a tragic, horrible abuse for any spiritual tradition to take it out. To say that we're going to worship, we're going to develop a higher state of consciousness but we're not going to talk about sex. As a matter of fact, we're going to forbid you from even thinking about it. It's evil. I think you could only do that to people you wanted to enslave. Because that, you take away their essential power. It remove from them an attachment to, any awareness of their most essential power to be free, their most essential freedom. And the ability to feel what I want, when I want, is my most essential freedom. And to be okay with it, and to command it and say, because I decided, it is good. You know, the whole, you know, in the Christian story, God made the world and they saw that it was good. You know, I made an orgasm and I saw that it was good. You know, to take that away, like, what's left? Certainly not conscious participation, certainly not advancement, certainly not civilization. Later on, when the British got a hold of this stuff, they got crazy chiseling penises off the walls and things like that. But what the text actually says, and it makes no bones about it, that Atum masturbated, ejaculated, swallowed the ejaculation, impregnated himself, vomited up Tefnut, spat out Shu. There's no alternate translation to that. So there's no sin in that one. There's nothing in our tradition that talks about anybody going blind from self-pleasure, because Atum symbol is the sun. It's the essence of light, the essence of awareness. Self-awareness is the essence of awareness. One can, again, the knowledge bit. You know, knowledge through self-awareness, the awareness of the sexual center. The sexual center is the house of knowledge. One does not create. One does not move forward. One does not move forward in physicality, in terms of having children and furthering life. One does not move forward intellectually. One does not move forward spiritually without self-knowledge, without deep and ecstatic, completely surrendered to the ecstasy of the self-knowledge of what is there to be held. You know, the story doesn't point to Atum knowing what was going to happen. The activity was purely for the pleasure that was discovered within the activity. This could be an eternal activity as far as we know, you know. It's not about we're just getting through this to go here. It's about embracing and surrendering to the embrace. And the entire cosmogony, this entire metaphor cosmogony is like this.
My teacher from the Hindu tradition was completely celibate. He didn't utilize sexuality or avert sexuality. And I asked him if he would teach me Tantra. He said, well, let me think about it. Come back tomorrow. And when I met him, he was wearing a very beautiful kind of robe. When I came back the next day and met him on the same hill, he was wearing a pitch black robe, and everything he wore was black. And I had sort of a sense that I might be in for something a little more intense than I had fully realized. And a Gori Baba, who is usually considered to be the greatest of the tantrics, is one who usually, their behavior is totally unpredictable. They'll do anything. And their only goal, if they're teaching, is to stop the world. To stop your mind. And of course for Westerners, whose minds are always going like that, you've got to have some fairly intense means to cut through that kind of busyness of the inner world. So the Agori Babas, he was an Agori Baba. This teacher of mine was a full Agori Baba, and taught in the classical Agori Baba fashion. So I never knew what he was about to do or what he was going to take me through, and I had to be ready for really anything, at any time. and go anywhere and do anything and completely accept what the situation was and what the conditions were, no matter how repugnant or how against everything I believed they were. I remember one time I had been sitting in front of this one body that was particularly snap, crackle, and poppy. You know, when you're watching a body burn and you're receiving teachings on impermanence, it's quite clear to you because you watch the skulls explode and the limbs contract and contort and move. You felt that it was very important to completely embrace death as part of the tantric process, because if there's any resistance or any holding back from anything that arises in the world of form, that's a separation. You immediately are introducing duality again. So it's a little different image than we normally have of Tantra with the beautiful scented oils and the anointing and all the beauty that you find within the sexual tantric practices, which are wonderful, and they are tantric. But there's this broader dimension of Tantra that has to do with working with wherever there's a resistance or a contraction in your inner being. And working directly with whatever creates the sense of separation from the sacred view.
The environment that I work in, which I think is very important, the environment that you work in, is very beautiful. It's a temple space, and when a client comes through the door, I'm there to receive them in a very human way, fully present, and that's the most important word, presence. There's nothing more important than presence. The reason a client made the phone call and got in the car and came is because they're missing something. They're feeling emptiness somewhere in their being. And often, even though the client will identify that as sexual, often it isn't sexual. Often it's their heart that is missing something. Or they need to express something. Or they just need to be touched. They haven't been touched for so long that their whole body is aching for it. And because the culture so boxes up our sensibilities, often men in particular will, when they feel a lack, identify it as a sexual lack. So when I receive the client, I have all my chakras open. I am radiating from every part of my being. And that way when I look in their eyes, I can feel what it is, where the emptiness is. And when I bring them into the room, the first thing I do is turn to them and say, "Would you like a hug?" And we embrace. And probably 9 out of 10 times I hear, oh, thank you so much. That feels so good. I really needed that. And this can be a guy who just was watching the Super Bowl with his buddies and had a few beers and has no concept of spiritual sexuality. But that embrace transmits so much through maybe, let's say, the fog. It still penetrates. And then in the session, when usually they're lying on the table, again, I am addressing all aspects of their being, not just their physical body. And often when I have a client that's thinking too much and not getting into the sensation and not starting to come more fully into themselves, I get them chanting. And that really pulls them into the experience of knowing their body and the information that the body holds. I have quite a few clients that are going through passages in their life that are very challenging for them. So many examples. I'll pick 2. One is a man who was married for 15 years. And in the process of those 15 years, he became emasculated. He felt like he was not capable of being a man and of being a good lover, and he's afraid of his own shadow at this point because of the dynamics between he and his wife. And here he is single now, wanting to date, absolutely terrified at the thought of it. And so we worked with him, or I worked with him. I guess I should say we, because when I work, I have spirit guides that are there working with me. And we built his sense of self back up. And I was also a counselor in terms of he would have a date and tell me all about it and his feelings about it. And I would tell him from a woman's perspective what I thought was maybe going on for that woman. And he was very, very relieved at a lot of the, interactions that we had. And after about probably 7 sessions, I felt like he graduated and he was really on his own. And so we had that, agreement that he could come back, but he'd done his work with me. And he wrote me a beautiful, beautiful letter that I'll cherish for my whole life about how I helped change his life. And he's a father of 2 girls that he's parenting by himself. And it made all the difference in the world to him, our work together. I have another client who's very large, and he perceives himself as not being able to really have a relationship. But he loves the goddess, and so he comes to me and he lies down, and I put a pillowcase between us, and I lie on top of him and I take his arms and we journey. I take him places. I story tell, and he usually books for 2 hours, and we go on this beautiful journey. We go to temples in Tibet and have a luscious fruit there in the temple, and then we get on the magic carpet and we go, and are chased by howling monkeys, or we just go on these great, beautiful journeys, run through meadows with butterflies, and for a man who has felt so alienated or so outside of human bonding, to come and to have 2 hours where he can just travel with a woman that he considers beautiful, and it's just a beautiful experience for him. And we started, as a result of connecting on that level, he's now asking me about how we can improve his health. And I've given him a dietary regime, very simple, just focus on fruits and vegetables, and he's doing that. And he called me up and said he was really having a hard time doing that, so the next session, could I bring a salad and feed him a salad? So I made this lovely salad, and half of the session was very sensuously. He said that he didn't really like fruits and vegetables and it wasn't working for him palate-wise. So I said, well, I'll make a very delicious salad. There's no way you won't like it. And so very sensuously I fed him the salad. And now he is more engaged with his health. So sometimes it can start one place and mushroom into a healing modality that I would never imagine. I would never imagine I'd be feeding this sweet man salad and encouraging him to take certain supplements and so forth. So it's just, it has a lot, each session has a life of its own. My intent and my focus is to meet the client exactly where they're at, even if it's very tawdry, let's say, where they're at. Their intention when they come in is they've had some beers and they're just in a very, I guess tawdry is the word to use, state. I meet them right there. I do not judge them. I make jokes and use humor that addresses exactly where they're at without judgment. And when you do that, a person opens up to you. And then the opening is there so that you can introduce them to yet more knowledge and more beauty. In a seminar setting, and as an educator, I don't think the buttons on a person are so close to the surface for you or for those attending your seminar. But when touch is involved, it's such a magical, powerful force, touching with full presence, full spiritual presence, touching another human, that I've had many grown men cry because something in them is touched that they have been holding inside. And then how do you deal with the crying grown man? You know, so that pulls a lot on you, your compassion, your understanding of psychology. It's very embarrassing for a grown man often to cry to a woman in the presence of a woman he's thinking of as just somebody who's going to provide me a moment of pleasure. For all of a sudden, for them to feel such strong sense of their humanity, and so how do you deal with all those emotions they're having? They're embarrassed, they don't know what's happening, sometimes they get angry. What are you doing to me? Why am I, so that's deep response to deal with. Whereas in a seminar, I think it stays more intellectual. It perhaps doesn't go so deep into dynamics like that. Well, in the shamanic tradition, you use whatever you can get your hands on, and sometimes that comes from internal places in yourself. Like, for instance, when I feel a lot of blockage in a person, I can open up my womb energy. I can consciously open all this womb energy up, and that's a model that we don't have in our culture. The only divine representation we have in Western culture is the Immaculate Mary, who conceived without intercourse. Whereas in like Yoruba culture, the pantheon includes these very sexy goddesses that just are spewing sexual energy all the time, everywhere. And that's where the rivers come from. That's where the ocean comes from, is the sexual force of these goddesses. So being very aware of those representations and having them actively alive in my life, being Brazilian, I grew up seeing these sexy goddesses. I can personally, as a human, open up that energy in my womb. And it revs things up, stirs things up, and it makes other people resound on the same level. It's difficult to be involved in work that you can't discuss freely, that you have to talk around. It's very difficult. It's very trying. So if it is your life's work, I'll give advice only to people who are going there because they feel it's their life's work. If you do feel a calling, then I say create a great infrastructure of support for yourself if you don't already have it. Find colleagues, find other healers, find moments at the ocean to just develop a relationship with the ocean and let it feed you and speak to you. Or maybe it's the forest for you, but really sink into nature, develop a very intimate relationship with nature, because nothing restores us more than that. And have your circle of colleagues, whether it be formal or just a natural flowing circle of friends that are like family. You need those things because a lot is drawn from you and pulled on, and there's a lot of re-sorting that you have to do of your internal self. When you are that intimate energetically with so many people, it's a very intricate process to give them back what's theirs and stay with what's yours. So that leads to another thing, which is you need to learn how to do that. When you close a session, you need to know how to, in a sense, transmute the energies that you've allowed to run through you of the other person. And that's some high shamanic work, doing that. So unless you really want to embrace the shamanic path, this transmuting, I don't know how a person could do it. So I say find your path for learning how to transmute energy, how to read energy. It's all about energy. So I guess the most important thing is to develop great skills for reading energy, for working with it, for healing yourself from whatever you might be impacted by from another person, from having the colleagues that understand that language and can help you with it. And, you really need to address your own unhealed states. That's crucial. So I would say if you're not a person who has always thirsted for spiritual understanding, don't go there. Don't go into this work, because you're going to be walking through fire. So don't go there unless that is your life's intent. Before each session, I go to my altar, and it's very beautiful. There are many candles. There are representations of important energies I want to have in the room. There is my patron saint. I won't hold this picture up because it'd probably just be too reflective, but it's Mary Magdalena. And flowers and so forth, and bells, and I request that this session bring out the fullest potential in both parties, myself and the client. And so I have work that many times a day brings me to the altar. And it's my work to go to the altar and to make these beautiful requests and to express great gratitude. So that's enriching. That's every time, it's so enriching. And then in the actual work, when I see a client respond to the fullness that's moving through me, often I feel just like a channel. I'm not even there, really. I'm channeling this abundance of presence of love and acceptance. When I see a client respond to that in a way that I know will enrich their life, what more can a person want? For my qualities of character and my drives, the things that turn me on, my passions, seeing another human feel the same, feel passionate, feel beautiful, feel wonderful about their life, that's completely fulfilling for me. And so that's what it gives to me immediately. And as a friend said, when he came one day to bring me a salad at the temple, he said, "Oh my God, you look radiant." The work builds me up. Sometimes the challenges tear me, but that's part of the building too. The work builds me up into a sense of more fullness, more fully connected with life, the life force. So I don't see anything I'd really rather do than this work. And I'm very anxious to learn more and to work with people that are more skilled, more knowledgeable than I am. I'm actively pursuing that sort of input because I know that this beauty can just grow and be more powerful. And I guess what I'd like to do is get to the point where just my glance is enough to dismantle someone's rigid, uncomfortable struggles with life and their encapsulation in the messages that society has encapsulated them in. That just a glance would shatter all that and bring them more fully into their happiness.
No, I help, I feel different energies that are happening. With each couple is different, so I just conduct energy and light from Father Sky and Mother Earth through my body, using me as a conduit, and help the energy move a little lot faster. I mean, after a while, they don't need me. I mean, nobody needs me, but sometimes it's good for a person who practices like me for a long time, and being a healer, it sort of helps the whole process to go a lot faster. So that's all I do. To when I see and feel, actually I don't see, but when I feel the energies, it needs to be moved. That's when I do things with my hands, open up or whatever needs to be done. For me, it's different from every healer, I believe, but for me it's about channeling light, pure light, and connecting to the source all the time. So it's very important for me to be very connected. It's very important for me to be healthy, and it's very important for me to do the practices too, so I can be much bigger conduit.
So the ceremony I do is called the ceremony of life. And it is bringing life back into these individuals that have lost hope. And in losing hope, it comes because they've lost the function and the use of their sexual life force energy. So there are specific ceremonies at times. If I'm dealing with someone who's lost a partner, there could be a ceremony of releasing that death, that change, of allowing the grief to be there, but for it to be there very powerfully, and then to give it away and to let it go. So there are times when I will give specific ceremonies for my clients to do outside of the office, in the privacy of the desert or a backyard. There are other times the actual work I do with my clients is a ceremony in and of itself, because a ceremony requires respect and dignity, high energy, unconditional love, intent, and purpose. And so there's a focus. So I use the energy. There's specific touch techniques that I use. There is teaching them how to do the fire breath, which is the breathing technique to bring the body to a full orgasm. There's a technique that is called, we use the term chakra because it's so well known on the planet that people understand it more so. Chakra merging. It can also be called wheel merging. And it's literally through breathing. It's aligning of the partner's energy and allowing the energy to flow back and forth. And so energy literally coursing up through and then into the other person until it creates this fountain of energy that comes out the top of the head. And the two people are in the most intimate, orgasmic state without any erection or any intercourse. And so many people, they'll have the physical intercourse, but they do not have the intimacy. And they do not know how to build that energy and feel the power of that energy. They rush to get into that lovemaking, the intercourse, the release, and then it's over. And they feel an emptiness inside. So teaching people how to slow down is a ceremony. How to breathe is a ceremony. And all of these are tools. And I call these tools weapons, because we have to cut away the dogma and the indoctrination that tells us what's right and what's wrong. When if we just go inside and trust our God-given spirit, we will know what we need to do for ourselves that honors not only ourselves, but the other. Because we're here on this planet for mutual benefit and welfare. Mutual benefit. So that we can have a beautiful planet to live on. And I don't mean that lightly, because it takes internal war and battle and discipline to really be a refined lover and a sacred prostitute.
So one of the things that's important to know is breath. If you cannot, most shamanic traditions knew breath. You change people's state when you can change their breathing. Sick people, depressed people breathe a certain way. Rigid people who are locked into themselves hold themselves and breathe a certain way. If you can unleash someone's breathing, there's real freedom. The second one is, I think, touch. Sex is about touch, but for some reason, a lot of people, it's barely touch. It's not a sensuous touch. But I think the laying on of hands tradition for the bringer of erotic joy is really my tradition. It is erotic massage. And I find the states that the erotic trance, if you can offer someone erotic trance, separate from the fantasy, separate from anything, just get them in trance and teach them to be there, that is a liberation. So that is, and I think erotic massage is ideal for men especially, who always feel they have to be the doers. If you can just be in a state of arousal, of erotic joy for a period of time, breath and touch. Eyes are important. It is, you can see, it is connection. Eyes, breath certainly is connection, touch is connection, but eyes are connection. You cannot be in a shame. Shame is one of the biggest things we deal with. Somebody cannot stay in shame and look you in the eyes. To stay with somebody and breathe is one of the major techniques to dispel shame. But also, if the sacred prostitute has truly cultivated in her body or his body erotic joy, it's the vehicle. It's like you can just see in the eyes how to let go, how to connect, how to be with. So in a lot of tantric traditions and Taoist lovemaking, it is just looking in eyes. And in fact, there is a whole school of anthropology that says we moved from apes to human consciousness because we could have orgasm while looking each other in the eyes instead of mounting from behind, no matter how much you like doggy style. To look somebody in the eye as you're in an orgasmic state is the leap of consciousness. The last element beyond breath, touch, breath, and eyes, I think, is arousal. This arousal is just such a wonderful state that to be with somebody in arousal as a state. And that's, so I see sacred intimates as educators.
If a prostitute is one who sells sex, I don't do that. I am a healer. I'm a priestess. I don't sell anything. Initiates can come to me and they are given the opportunity to pay tribute and to surrender to whatever may happen. I'm not a priestess if I say XYZ is going to happen for XYZ fee. It's a roll of the dice. I don't know what's going to happen. And that's the gift that I can offer an initiate, a space where you can be free not to know what's going to happen and know that that's safe, to know that that is healing, to discover something, not to pay for something that you already know about.
I would like to see more men take on that work in life and actually take on that embodiment and take on that title even. There are the people out there, both women and men, but I think women in particular I'm speaking about, there's this whole body of women who would love to be able to connect with a male sacred prostitute, and that would be the perfect and ideal for them to begin to be quickly initiated and moved into an arena where they have literally an initiation so that they can then begin to work with the energies themselves. There's not enough people out there for this body of people to connect with who are willing and able and ready and just don't know where to find the connection. I think is a very, very important function. And also, the other part that's missing is the conduit for these people to find each other, because in today's Western culture, you have to be very, very careful as a sacred prostitute how you put yourself out there, how people find you. It's either word of mouth and trust, veiled, worded ads maybe. It's a hit and miss process that can often be a wrong hit for a person. There's a lot of people offering tantric massage out there on the back pages of classified ads that are not the sacred prostitute, are not the embodiment of this work, and use the word tantra to draw in customers. That is not what I'm talking about here. And yet there are very few arenas in this uptight society that we live in that's litigious and there are factions of it that are police state-like, where these people that want this can't find the people anyway, even if they exist. So I think we need to find creative ways and means of connecting these people. Because in my mind, the more people that are connected in that way, the more people that are initiated, will lead to a more rapid deployment of the techniques and the uplifting at a soul level of the people that are on the planet who are needed today to bring us into a more optimistic future that is an embodiment of nature and connected in all those ways.